Chapter 9 of Pippi in the South Seas. Chapter 9 is called Pippi Talks Sense into Jim and Buck. And there Pippi is. It looks like she's looking over a cliff. It's the top of a tree or a plant. I'm not sure. Let's read. Chapter 9. Pippi Talks Sense into Jim and Buck. The shark's teeth had only scratched Tommy's poor leg, and when he calmed down, he still wanted to continue to climb to the big cave. Pippi twisted strands of hibiscus fiber into a stout rope and tied it to a big stone. Then, lightly as a mountain goat, she hopped over to the cave and secured the end of the rope there. Now, even Annika dared to climb to the cave. When you had a steady rope to hang on to, it became easier. It was a wonderful cave. It was so big that all of the kids could get inside without any trouble. The cave is almost better than our hollow oak at the Villa Kula, said Tommy. No, not better, but it's just as good, said Annika, who felt a lump in her throat at the thought of the beautiful old oak and didn't want to admit that anything could be better. Momo showed everybody how much coconut and breadfruit were stored already in the cave. One would be able to live here for several weeks without starving. Mona showed them a hollow bamboo cane filled with the most beautiful pearls. She gave Pippi and Tommy and Annika each a handful. Oh, those are nice marbles you have to play with. This is the best marbles I ever seen in this country, said Pippi. It was delightful to sit at the opening of the cave and look out over the sea glittering in the beautiful sunlight. And it was great fun to lie on one's tummy and play in the water. Tommy announced a contest, and Momo was terribly good at it. But no one could beat Pippi. She had a way of splashing all of the water the furthest that no one could imitate. If it's drizzling in New Zealand today, said Pippi, it's my fault. Tommy and Annika didn't do so well at it. It doesn't seem like that's your thing, said Momo with a superior air. He didn't quite consider Pippi as being one of these other children. So they can't splash, said Pippi. You don't know what you're talking about sometimes. That is taught to them at school from the first grade. Long distance splashing and altitude splashing and sprint splashing. Why, you ought to see Tommy and Annika's teacher. Oh, she can splash. She won first prize in splasher. The whole town cheered when she runs around splashing to beat the band. Bah, said Tommy and Annika. Pippi raised her hand to shield her eyes from the glare as she looked out to the sea. I see a ship out there, she said. It's a tiny steamer. I wonder what it's doing in these parts. And she had reason to wonder. The steamer was headed right towards the island at a very good clip. On board there were several South Sea Islanders and 2 other men. Their names were Jim and Buck. They were dirty, coarse-looking men and looked like real bandits, bad guys. And that is exactly what they were. Once when Captain Longstocking was in shop where he bought stuff, Jim and Buck had been there too. They had seen Captain Longstocking put a couple of unusually large and beautiful pearls on the counter, and had heard him say that on the island the children used the pearls like these to play with marbles. Since that day, they had only one goal, and that was to go to the island and try to get a hold of all of the pearls. They knew that Captain Longstocking was very strong, and they also had a healthy respect for the crew of the Hoptoad. They therefore decided, right then and there, to take advantage of an opportunity when all the men were away on a hunt. Now, with their chance had come, hiding behind the island close by, they had seen through their binoculars Captain Longstocking and his crew and all of the adults on the island paddle away. They were only waiting until the canoes were out of sight. "Drop anchor," shouted Buck when the ship was close to the island. Pippi and all the other children watched them in silence from the cave up above. The men dropped their anchor, and Jim and Buck jumped into a skiff and rowed ashore. The crew were given orders to stay on board. "Now, we'll sneak up to the village and overtake them," said Jim. "Probably only the women and children are at home." "Yeah," said Buck, "and besides, there were so many women in the canoes, I should think that there were only children left on the island. I hope they're playing marbles." Ha 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 ha. His voice carried clearly over the water. "Why?" shouted Pippi from the cave. "Do you especially like playing marbles?" "I think it's just as much fun playing leapfrog." Jim and Buck turned around in astonishment and saw Pippi with all the children sticking their heads out from the cave. A delighted grin spread over their faces. "There we have the kids," said Jim. "Perfect," said Buck. "This is in the bag." But they decided nevertheless to play it safe and be sly. No one could know where the children kept their pearls, and therefore it was best to try to win them over. The men pretended that they hadn't come to the island to find pearls at all, but were just out for a nice little excursion, and they had felt hot and sticky. And Buck suggested to begin with that they go for a swim. "I'll row back to the boat and fetch our bathing trunks," he said. Then he did. In the meantime, Jim stood alone on the shore. "Is there a good beach about here?" he called to the children in a friendly voice. "Oh, wonderful beach. Absolutely wonderful for sharks. They come here every day." "Oh, nonsense," said Jim. "I don't see any sharks." But he was a little worried just the same, because when Buck came back with the bathing trunks, he told him what Pippi had said. "Oh, that's nonsense," said Buck, and he shouted to Pippi, "Are you the one who's saying that it's dangerous to swim here?" "No, I never said that," said Pippi. "Oh, that's funny," said Jim. "Didn't you just tell me that there were sharks here?" "Yeah, I said that. But dangerous? Nah, that I wouldn't say. My grandfather swam here last year." "Well then," said Buck. "And grandfather got back from the hospital already last Friday," said Pippi, "with the fanciest wooden leg you ever seen on an old man. Why, it's beautiful." And then she looked at the water thoughtfully. "So I couldn't really say why it's dangerous. Of course, a few arms and legs do disappear if one goes swimming. But as long as a wooden leg don't cost more than $1 a pair, I don't think you should deprive yourself of an invigorating swim just because of miserliness." And then she looked at the water once more. "Oh, my grandfather, he takes a childish delight in his wooden leg. He says is absolutely irreplaceable when he goes out to fight. You know what I think, said Buck? I think you're telling me whoppers. Whoppers are lies. Your grandfather must be an old man. I'm sure he doesn't want to be in any fights. Ah, that's what you think, cried Pippi in a shrill voice. He's the most ill-tempered old man who ever hit his opponent on the head with a wooden leg before. And if he can't fight from morning till night, he's absolutely miserable. Then he gets into such a rage that he starts to begin to bite himself in his nose. Oh, that's nonsense, said Buck. No one can bite themselves in their own nose. I'm gonna try. I can't do it. Oh, yeah, they can. Pippi insisted. He climbs up on a big tall chair. And Buck thought about this for a while, but then he swore, I don't feel like listening to your silly chitter-chatter any longer. Come on, Jim, let's get undressed. Besides, I'd like to have you know that my grandfather has the longest nose in the world. He has 5 parrots. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parrots that sit in a row on my grandfather's nose. By now, Buck was really getting angry. You little red-headed vixen, do you know that you're the worst liar that I've ever met? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Are you really trying to make me believe that 5 parrots could sit in a row on your grandfather's nose? Confess that this is a lie. Yep, said Pippi sadly. It's a lie. There, you see, said Buck. Isn't that what I said? Oh, it's a terrible, terrible, horrible lie, said Pippi, still even sadder. That's what I thought from the beginning, said Buck. Because, well, the 5th parrot, sobbed Pippi and burst into a flood of tears. Why, the 5th parrot has to stand on only one of his legs. Oh, get lost with you, said Buck, and he and Jim went behind a bush to get undressed. Pippi, you don't even have a grandfather, do you? Said Annika reproachfully. Nope, said Pippi. Must I have a grandfather? Buck was the first one to come out in his bathing trunks. He made an elegant dive from a cliff into the sea, and he swam about. All the children up in the cave watched with great interest, and they spotted a shark fin, which flashed above the surface of the water for a second. Shark! Shark! Cried the watch out, and Buck, who was treading water, enjoying himself immensely, turned around and saw the terrible creature coming straight at him. There was probably never been anyone who could swim as fast as Buck swam then. And in 2 split seconds, he had reached the shore and rushed out of the water, and he was both frightened and furious. And it seemed as if he thought it was all Pippi's fault that there were sharks in the water. Aren't you ashamed of yourself, you nasty little girl? He screamed. The sea is full of sharks. Well, have I said anything else? Pippi asked sweetly. Have I said anything else? And then she tilted her head to one side. I don't always lie, you see, just sometimes. Jim and Buck went behind the bush and got dressed again, and they felt now that the time had come to begin thinking about the pearls. No one could tell how long Captain Longstocking and the others were actually going to be away. Listen, kids, said Buck. I heard someone say that there were some good oyster beds in these regions. Do you know if that's true? I'll say, said Pippi. Oyster shells so crunching under your feet wherever you walk down there at the bottom of the sea. Go down and see for yourself. But Buck didn't want to do that. There are great big pearls in every oyster, said Pippi, about like this one. And she held up a giant shimmering pearl. Jim and Buck got so excited they could hardly stand still. "You got any more of those?" said Jim. "We would like to buy them from you." This was a lie. Jim and Buck had no money with them to buy pearls. They only wanted to get them dishonestly. Yeah, we got at least 10 or 12 quarts of pearls here in the cave, said Pippi. Jim and Buck were unable to hide their delight. "Oh, that's wonderful," said Buck. "Bring them here and we'll buy them all." "Oh, no. What are these poor children going to use to play marbles with afterwards? Have you ever thought of that?" There was a lot of discussion back and forth before Jim and Buck realized that it would be impossible to get the pearls by the clever maneuvering. But what they couldn't get by the clever maneuvering they decided to take by force. Now they at least knew where the pearls were, and the only thing they had to do was climb over the cave and take them. Climb over to the cave. Yes, that was the rub. And during the discussion, Pippi had carefully removed the hibiscus rope, which was now safely in the cave. Jim and Buck didn't think that the climb over the cave looked very inviting, but there didn't seem to be any other way to get the pearls. "You do it, Jim," said Buck. "No, you do it, Buck," said Jim. "You do it, Jim," said Buck, and Buck said, "No, you do it, Jim." He was stronger than Jim, so Jim started climbing. He frantically grabbed hold of all the jutting rocks he could. There was a cold sweat pouring down his back. "Hold on, for heaven's sake, so you won't fall down, you silly old man," said Pippi to him in an encouraging way. Then Jim fell in. Buck was shouting and cursing on the beach. Jim was also screaming because he saw 2 sharks headed in his direction, and when they were no more than 3 feet from them, Pippi threw down a coconut right in front of their noses, and that scared them off just long enough for Jim to swim to the shore and crawl up on the little plateau. The water was running down in rivulets from his clothing, and he looked miserable. Buck was scolding him. "Do it yourself and see how easy it is," screamed Jim. "Well, now I'll show you," said Buck, and he started to climb. All the children watched him. Annika was almost a bit frightened as she watched him coming closer. "Oh, don't climb there. You'll be falling in," said Pippi. "Well, where?" asked Buck. "There," said Pippi, pointing, and Buck looked down at his feet. "A lot of coconuts get wasted this way," said Pippi a moment later when she had thrown one in the sea to prevent the sharks from eating a buck who was desperately floundering in the water from his fall. But up he came, mad as a hornet, and he certainly wasn't one to be afraid. He immediately started climbing again, and because he had made up his mind once and for all to make his way into the cave and get his hands on those pearls. This time he managed to do better, and when he was almost at the opening of the cave, he called out triumphantly, "Now, you little whatchamacallits, this time you're gonna get it." Then Pippi stuck out her index finger and poked him in the stomach. There was a splash. "You could have at least taken this with you when you took off," Pippi shouted after him as she landed a coconut bag on the snout of a shark that was coming too close. But more sharks came, and she had to throw more coconuts. One of them hit Buck on the head. "Oh dear, that was you! Sorry," said Pippi when Buck yelled. "From up here you look like a big nasty shark." Jim and Buck now decided to sit it out until the children were forced to come down. "When they get hungry, they'll have to leave there," said Buck grimly, "and then they'll see something." He shouted to the children, "I feel sorry for you if you're going to have to sit in that cave until you starve to death. Oh, have a kind heart. You won't have to worry about us for the next 2 weeks. We have rations and coconuts and fish and all sorts of yummy things up here." And then she cracked a big coconut and she drank the milk and ate it. Jim and Buck were so mad they swore. The sun was setting and they began to make preparations to spend the night ashore. They didn't dare row out to the steamer to sleep because then the children could get away with all the pearls. They laid down on the hard rocks in their wet clothing, and they were very uncomfortable. Here these two awful men are after Pippi plays a trick on them. You see the shark fins in that picture too. And up in the cave, all the children were merrily sitting and eating and drinking. It was so good. The whole situation was very exciting and pleasant. And once in a while, they would stick their heads out to look at Jim and Buck. And by now, it was so dark that all they could see was a fuzzy outline of the men on the plateau below. You could still hear them swearing a lot down there. And suddenly, there was a violent shower of a tropical kind. The rain came down in torrents, and Pippi stuck the tip of her nose out the cave. "You certainly are the lucky ones down there, aren't ya?" she shouted at Jim and Buck. "What do you mean by that?" said Buck hopefully. He thought that the children were perhaps changing their minds and wanted to give them the pearls. "What do you mean by saying we're lucky? I mean, just think how lucky it is that you were already soaking wet before this rainstorm came. Oh, that's some luck. Otherwise, you would have gotten soaking wet from the rain." More swearing could be heard down on the plateau, but it was impossible to tell whether it was Jim or Buck. "Well, good night. Sleep well," said Pippi, "because that's what we're all going to do now." And all the children laid down on the floor of their comfortable cave with full bellies, and Tommy and Annika lay on either side of Pippi, holding her hands. They were quite comfortable, and it was so warm and snug in the cave. Outside, the rain was pouring down. That's the end of chapter 9. Next time we'll read chapter 10.